it wasn't about her actual post. It was about my history. It was about the moments I felt excluded or dismissed by people who carried religion like a weapon instead of a window.
What if the key to transformation lies in shifting your perspective? Hi, I'm Dr. Payal Beri. Welcome to Reframing Perspectives. Every conversation here is about one thing: how empathy changes the way we lead, connect, and create impact. Each episode, we get to explore deep, authentic conversations designed to expand your mindset. Whether you're looking to transform your leadership, deepen your relationships within your circle, your community, and friends, or gain clarity in your own personal growth, each episode will inspire you to see things differently and take action. If you're ready to challenge your thinking and embrace transformation, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
So, I have a question for you. How do you handle when a good friend of yours starts to make choices that diverge from your own, or it's just going down a different path? So, let me just share. A few months ago, a very good friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, revealed that she decided that she wants to deepen her relationship with Jesus. And at first, she shared it, casually when we were just going out for dinner. And then one day, I was scrolling and I saw a post from my friend Topsie, and yes, she gave me permission to use her name, that was big. She shared her journey and claimed her relationship with Jesus very boldly, publicly, online, on different social media platforms. And it was an 8-part description. And I saw that, and immediately I felt this tightening happening. And it was like my weight, just dropped into my stomach. And I know it wasn't judgment, or at least I didn't think so at first, right? And it wasn't even confusion, it was tension. The kind that whispers and wonders, oh no, is everything going to change? Oof. And I almost skipped past that message that she wrote because it's a reflexive reaction. It's a version of emotional avoidance that we do now, because that's what it really is. It's emotional avoidance. We live in a time where emotional avoidance is easy to do. We swipe, we block, we avoid, we put ourselves on do not disturb. We've made it really easy to not actually process the emotions that we're experiencing and instead replace it and calling it setting boundaries. And we soothe ourselves thinking that avoidance is actually dealing with issues, but no, it's actually not, because we're not actually allowing ourselves to process what we're experiencing. And that's exactly what I was doing. I was not processing it. I was not wondering, like, why is this tension happening? But then I realized that all of this stuff was baggage about religion and relationships that I have that I'm projecting here. And of course, I paused and I stopped and I said to myself, Pyle, don't make this about you, and ask what's going on with your friend and what's unfolding in her life that this path feels like home. You preach this all the time about empathy, so it's time for you to practice it in this moment with something that is just a little tough for you. So I did that because the thing is, this episode, it's not about religion per se, it's about friendship. And so let me rewind for a second, because I think it's really important for me to share that I'm not religious. I'm deeply spiritual. I do believe in a higher power. I believe that there is a God. I believe that there is no different than anyone else in that sense, but the difference is just what we call them. So someone might call them Shiva if they're Hindu, Allah, they may call them Jesus, they may call them whatever it is. I call it the universe. It's a higher power that created all of us. And there's an energy that connects us humans to this earth, to nature, and the kinds of things that don't necessarily need to live in a temple or church, but it's an everyday presence and how you practice it. And that's just my personal belief that I have. And the reason that I've kept this distance from religion is because I've seen the damage of what it can cause when it's weaponized. And I've seen that the division in families that can happen when someone doesn't follow a certain tradition and suddenly they're shamed for it, and their family pain is dismissed in the headstrong blind faith in something that is invisible. And so that feeling that I have, what I felt is that I've seen this pressure to perform holiness rather than humanity. And I find it to be really interesting because there's this interesting space that happens with what people claim to be in the name of religion. But what I see it as is weaponized to actually shame anyone around you versus using religion for the text of it is for what it really was built for. And so that blind faith and using this as what I consider sometimes a armor, a protection measure has always been something that's been really hard for me. I've witnessed judgment being masqueraded as righteousness. And I've seen religious spaces become sometimes more of image policing where compassion is conditional and curiosity is punished, that you have to follow this way, that this is what it is. And by the way, I come across this in every religion, this narrowness that leaves no space for difference and the control that gets disguised as culture, right? And this hurt that hides behind this holiness. And I've seen this over and over again. And I've even experienced it towards me. And so what bothered me, I realized, wasn't religion itself. And that's the thing that I want to make clear. It's not religion itself, it's the interpretation and manipulation of religion that is used by those who are unbothered to do the actual deep work and the actual compassion and the goodness in what religious texts actually share. And so when those things conflate, or those who conflate their wounds with a stubborn way of judgment. So what I find is that those who hide behind religion with a wounds that they don't actually want to heal, but they hide behind this text to use it, that is actually what I find challenging. And that's what I realized in that moment, that it's not actually religion, right? Religion, I think, is actually very beautiful. And I think there's a grounding in there and there's an anchor in there that's just really peaceful and kind. But it's what it gets used as. And sadly, that's where then, regardless of like going big from like thinking about wars, but even if we think within our communities and we think about people who've been ostracized or people who've been discharged and removed or bullied, often it's coming from a place not from the actual understanding of this experience with God, but I think it has a lot to do with how it's weaponized to be used against, for those people who don't actually do the deeper work. So when I'm looking at Topsie's post and all of that came up for me, and I thought, oh no, is she going to start seeing me differently? Right? I was taking previous experiences and projecting them in that specific moment. And yes, this is what happens in my brain. So, I hate to admit it, but I even caught myself wondering like, oh no, am I going to lose this friendship because of this? And there it was. I caught my own judgment, my own fear, and my own assumptions that I keep saying are the worst things that we can do. And here I am doing it again, human. So the most important thing is catching it. So I did. And it wasn't about her actual post. It was about my history. It was about the moments I felt excluded or dismissed by people who carried religion like a weapon instead of a window. And so underneath all of it was a lot of grief that was coming up, a grief that comes up from watching something that's meant to bring people closer, but instead it's used to push them away. And I was wondering like, oh, what is this going to do here? Because this is someone that really matters to me. But then another part of me spoke up. And this part, I'm so glad spoke up. Because the part of me that shaped by growing up as a third culture kid plays such a big role in my life. Thing is like, so I'm Indian by ethnicity, but I never actually grew up in India. I would visit a lot and I would spend time there quite a bit. But I was actually raised across multiple places in Egypt, in Dubai, in Iraq, in Australia, and of course, the United States. And being in diverse environments really shaped my perspective across everything that I do, and especially how I view community and diversity. I love being around diverse places. In fact, being in homogenous spaces is actually what makes me nervous. So growing up in some of my fondest memories have been when I've been invited to iftar dinners for my Muslim friends during Ramadan, and the warmth and the togetherness that I would feel there, the joy that I would have, and the food was just next level. And I wasn't Muslim, but I didn't have to be. I didn't have to be to share a meal, to learn, to understand, to care. Until today, some of them are my most wonderful friends. And when I grew up in Egypt, I went to an American school that was specifically for expat kids. And we celebrated everything, Christmas, Diwali, we would have international days. Everything was celebrated because it's an international school. And we were focused on that, the beauty of that. So that shaped me and that shaped how much and reminded me how much I loved, celebrating the Hindu holidays that I grew up with in my home. And my friends who just weren't Hindu, but cherished that and were excited by it and were fascinated by it. And it's not because they needed to practice Hinduism, but it's because they cared about me that they found it so interesting, and there are things about that I love. So there's something sacred about someone celebrating your tradition with you, not because they're obligated, but because they're curious and it's a way of forming respect. It's a way of like understanding each other, right? And I realized that's what made those moments so beautiful. Like how lucky am I to have grown up in an environment where I grew up around so much diversity and I was able to celebrate and experience that. And I never quite found community in religious spaces per se, but the community that I found just within the spaces of friendships that I had and going into their homes and their stories and their traditions and their food and their celebrations. And then I thought about my grandparents. And I thought about how my grandparents actually lived in Pakistan before the partition of India. So when I asked my grandmother about what life was like there, she always spoke about it with such joy and nostalgia. And she talked about their Muslim neighbors and about how peaceful things were. And it wasn't about being Hindu or Muslim, it was about being human, being a neighbor, being in community, celebrating together, being there for each other. And if they could do that during a time of literal national division, then why couldn't I do the same in this moment of inner hesitation? And that's what it really was this inner hesitation. And there's a certain kind of trust and intimacy that comes when someone says, here's something that's really sacred to me, and I want to share it with you. So who am I here to not hold that with care, especially for someone that I care about so deeply? So this is where I had to make a choice. I could either pull away and let my fear decide the story, or I could lean in and get to know my friend Topsie more deeply for what she was going through and what she was now embracing. So I did something that was radical and was getting curious and was hard, but I did it. I read the post, but this time with intention. I read it not with defending my own beliefs because it's not about me. I read to understand Topsy. I was releasing that emotional avoidance and use this as an opportunity to actually understand Topsy's journey and work through my own discomfort. Because what I saw this as was because Topsy is such an important person in my life, it is important for me to lean in and learn more about this experience. And through that experience, guess what? I'm also going to learn so much more about this beautiful traditions and celebrations and scripture that she believes in so much. And I wanted to walk alongside with her. So, by not letting my emotional avoidance about how I feel about religion in general get in the way or dictate my behavior or make my judgments about it, I was filled with so much joy and happiness for her. I genuinely was. I was so excited for her and I was so curious about it. And I engaged with her story because this was a side of her that I never fully saw before. And probably because I had my walls up, but also this was part of her that she kept private because she hadn't fully embraced it about herself. So I became excited to learn. And I used this as a learning opportunity about Topsy. And it opened up my experience. And guess what? It actually softened my relationship with religion as well. It really did. I started asking questions like, okay, so help me understand, like, what does missionary work mean to you? Or what is it about Jesus's teachings that resonates most with you right now? Or how has this brought peace to you? We went to dinner and I actually asked her the questions of how has embracing Jesus and Christianity and reading the Bible and sitting there with it and really digesting this from an emotionally processing space, what has actually changed and shifted in your life? And her answer was so beautiful. She shared about how she's not gossiping anymore. How she's realized that she doesn't want to actually engage in watching shows that are, weaponizing people or bullying people, like certain reality TV shows. She's stopped listening to certain kinds of music that, is just very tough. And something really interesting happened in that moment when she was sharing this about all of her learnings and what she shifted in her day to day, her behaviors. What was really beautiful was that my work in empathy, and I can tell you, it was in 2019 specifically when I started to really deepen my relationship with empathy and relationship with, understanding community, society, and relationships. In that moment, I remember I actually released watching some of these reality shows. If there's reality shows that I do watch, it's an upper like Queer Eye where it's all about healing and happiness. I started to be more mindful about the types of music that I also have in my life because I wanted that. I started being mindful about the types of relationships that I have in my friend circle that don't enable negativity, that don't enable racism, that don't enable bullying, that don't enable passive aggressive attention. And I will tell you that when I released those friendships, when I released consuming that type of media, it changed the way that I now relate to others, the way that there's more generosity and kindness and compassion. And I always think about it that if I talk about empathy and I teach empathy and I embody empathy, then I've got to practice that. So, what I noticed in that moment when Topsy was talking about the teachings of the Bible and, how it shifted her relationship, how she changes her relationship with her partner, all of these things, I realized in that moment that there actually wasn't that much of a difference between what she was doing in her life through the navigation of the Bible and Christianity and what I was doing in my life through the guidance of believing in a universe, in a higher power, in the idea that, we are what we believe, that, what we consume is what we then ultimately see the world in. And I saw that there was actually so much more commonality in that. And in that moment, I actually stopped seeing the religion and started seeing the person and the softness in her voice, the conviction, the peace, the happiness. Because it wasn't about all of those challenges that I have with religion. It was looking at this person who really used it as an anchor to really build their own emotional expression. And in that, I saw a mirror. And Topsy deepening her relationship with Jesus opened something up in me as well, because she said something to me that was about by her actually building and understanding the religion by reading the book and seeing it for herself, she was no longer relying on other people interpreting it for her. And she was taking ownership over her life choices based off of the relationship she directly has and this information that she's receiving that's helping her become a much more softer, vulnerable, emotionally available person who is embodying herself outside of herself and in service of. So now it's about healing and making impact in the world and doing good versus the self-serving way of looking at things. And I see that again, no different than the involvement that I've had in my emotional maturity. So I looked at that as, someone who is really looking at this and religion being an anchor and a system and a belief that helps them see the world and a space larger than themselves. And so to hold that same, the frustration of religion that's weaponizing it, and also holding space for those who recognize the role of religion in having humanity, both can exist and I can both have those.
Hi, so I'm pausing the episode for a quick moment and for a quick favor. If you haven't already, if you could just click subscribe, leave a review wherever you're listening to this episode, it would be really helpful. The only way we can know to make sure that we provide the right type of podcast episodes, the right type of guests, and to make sure that we're delivering the type of content that you actually want to hear, it's through your reviews and through your support. Thanks. And now back to the episode.
See, like I grew up Hindu, but not strictly. My mom was religious and she is religious, but in her own way. And she'd pray in the morning and she continues to do that. And, she has her religion, rituals, and all of those things, but she never imposed it on us. So she believed that your relationship with God is very personal. And even my grandfather, my mom's father, very deeply Hindu, but he read the Quran in sheer curiosity and respect. And he wanted to understand what others believed. And I thought that that was really beautiful. And that was where I also realized, because of watching Topsy love something so deeply, reminded me that it's not the structure, it's the sincerity. It's the sincerity and the evolvement of what this means for the bigger world. So, what do I want to do now? I actually want to read the Gita. I want to understand the teachings, not because I'm trying to find religion or because I want to understand how people find themselves through it, but it's so that I can hold an informed conversation. All of these things that I have these resistance to would be solved if I picked up the book and I read it and I understood it, because these texts, they have shaped our nations, identities, our systems. And if we want to engage with the world in an informed way, then I want to engage in it in knowing, in the same way that Topsy said that now that she is able to have a direct relationship because she's not basing it off of interpretations of what other people say to her. Similarly, that is a place to anchor in. And I thought that that was the most beautiful thing. So by me stepping out and zooming out, right? And because of this moment with Topsy, isn't just about religion. It's about what it means to stay in relationship with people who are different from us, especially right now when it's so easy to just have that emotional avoidance. So we're living in a world where disagreements feel very dangerous and where difference can feel betrayal, where curiosity gets mistaken for complicity. And here's my boundary, and this is a firm boundary. If someone is celebrating racism, genocide, inhumane treatment of others, bullying, that is not difference. That is dehumanization. And that I will never champion. So that I want to make clear about. But what I'm talking about is if someone is evolving in a way that's rooted in love, peace, healing, and you see them becoming a transformed person that's genuinely in good, I want to learn from it. I think about, for example, a nonprofit organization that I was working with that provides bachelor degrees to incarcerated men. And by providing bachelor degrees to them, it helps actually reduce prison violence. And I actually got to interview a couple of these men, and they're actually on my podcast, Adam Purcell and Carlos. I have two separate podcast episodes, but each one of them, Adam spent 30 years in prison, Carlos spent 17 years in prison, but they both stated that what helped save them was actually the Bible, that when they read that, they transformed their ways to finding purpose in healing themselves and finding purpose to build trust in community and support, what they're doing now that they're out, they're doing phenomenal work. I mean, Adam, if you listen to the podcast episode with him, Adam Purcell, he literally this man served 30 years, but while he was in there, he released his gang identity. He helped mentor other kids who were coming through the prison system to release their identity, to transform themselves. He wrote a book. He passed a bill in the Wisconsin Congress, did so many incredible things. For the last 8 years that he's been out, he's built a consulting firm that focuses on healing trust between marginalized communities, formerly incarcerated, and the police reinforcement community, and for the police and everyone in the system. And he's doing these incredible, incredible pieces of work there. And Carlos, on the other hand, same thing. He spent 17 years in prison, transformed himself, written 3 books, and he's doing work where he's helping to support inner city kids to make sure that they don't go down the route that he went through. And he's supporting them by providing them with emotional support, emotional mentorship, financial literacy. He's doing incredible work. And so I think to myself that if religion can help reform someone and that's their path to becoming a productive part of our society, that's beautiful. Like, how amazing is that, right? That they take full accountability of what they did do, yet they are now moving forward. And I see this as this curiosity about religion that if in that moment, when I looked at Topsy's post, if I had reverted, if I had resisted, if I had lived in my belief system and just decided that that's the identity, that's what it is, I'd rather not have a friend who's religious versus really understanding it, I would have lost out on all of this. I really would have lost out on so much of this disillusionment that I do have about just what religion does in our society with wars and hatred and shame and anger and all these things. But that's all the things that gets weaponized by people who actually haven't done the work, by the people who haven't healed themselves, who are hiding and masquerading behind it. But those who actually have done the work, those who are actually living out whether it's Islam, whether it's Hinduism, whether it's Judaism, whether it's Christianity, are some of the kindest and sweetest people that I have in my community. And what that moment also was just shedding is that true friendship isn't about agreement. It's about compassion. It's about showing up for those things that matter. It's about, standing by someone's side as they're going through something so transformational for them and using it also as an opportunity to possibly question the things that may be coming up for you in that moment, because that's where those friendships really evolve. In fact, by having those friends who are different and who have those different perspectives prevents me from creating this echo chamber, where everything seems like, oh, we all believe in the same thing. It actually heals that discomfort that we have inside of us because those are the moments that you learn about them, right? You learn about the things that, because of what they're going through, it's teaching you moments about yourself. And whether it's processing the emotional avoidance like I had, or it's getting comfortable with something new. And Topsy never, ever asked me to believe what she believes. She's shared because I asked, because I got curious and I chose to listen. And because we don't need to be on the same path walking besides each other. And honestly, her openness made me more open. Her peace made me question my assumptions. And her love made me remember what really matters. And that's the point, right? Because of surrounding myself and getting curious and being excited about what she's going through, about what my other friends going through, these beliefs actually build more humanity. And this is what I find to be so beautiful because by putting myself in rooms where I'm going to iftar parties and playing games and, they're dancing and music and everything, or going to Muslim weddings or, going to a night of like Shabbat or like, celebrating and inviting people into my home when we're celebrating Diwali or, learning from Topsy more about Christianity or working with this nonprofit that focuses on providing this, these degrees to incarcerated men and they, teach Bible studies and psychology. All it's doing is it's releasing those fears that stay with us because the reason that those fears are there is because it's an unknown. But because when you lean in, especially when it's safe, right? Topsy's safe because Topsy's a good friend of mine. She is someone who I adore. I so deeply adore her. And because that's a safe relationship, I get to ask questions and support her, and she gets to share whatever she feels comfortable sharing. So that's what makes all of this so beautiful. And here's what I want to kind of leave you with is that have you ever caught yourself pulling back from a friend's journey because it triggered something in you? And have you ever assumed their path meant the end of your connection? So I'm going to ask you all that before you retreat, pause. Ask, is this about them or is this about me? And what is it that's coming up that I'm emotionally avoiding? Because that moment with Topsy, it reminded me that discomfort isn't a red flag. Sometimes it's an invitation to expand ourselves, to reframe, to lean in. So let your friendships actually stretch you, let them surprise you. And most importantly, let them teach you something that you didn't know that you actually needed to learn about yourself. This was that one moment. And I'm so grateful that I didn't swipe past this and that I didn't avoid this because how you handle when a good friend of yours starts to make choices that are a little bit different from yours and, may bring up emotions for yourself because you have certain belief systems, well, that's where you're able to really question and look at, is this a moment that I should surrender into this? Is this a moment for me to understand and have compassion? Because I think that one thing that we do often, and as you can tell, I've done this too, is that we take these bigger, grandiose concepts about what's happening in the larger world, and we forget that it doesn't actually apply to like that one-on-one person. And when we're able to lean into that, I've actually started to appreciate the role that religion does have, like in my mom's life, in Topsie's life, in, my other friend's life. And I see how much comfort it provides, how much openness, involvement, maturity that it provides for them. And it's just this groundedness in seeing that there's something bigger than you and something more to give service in. And what I find often is that a lot of the things, like I mentioned, that Topsy was talking about, that she is going through, that she is experiencing now, these are things that I've experienced too. And it just further deepens my belief system that, call it whatever religion you want to, call it, whatever name you want to give that higher power. But ultimately, as humans, we're all looking for that same thing, which is kindness, which is a sense of belonging, which is a sense of support, which is community. And the more compassion and empathy that we can have for each other and that we can have in these spaces, especially when it's those moments of resistance, the more that we're actually going to come together and realize, oh, wait a second. Okay, great. If that's what that's teaching you, wonderful. Me and Topsy share so many similar values and so many similar ways of how we believe in existing in this world, even though our paths of learning that may have come from different places. So instead of focusing on the differences, I'm focusing on the similarities. I'm focusing on, wow, how beautiful that you took this path and I've taken this path, and yet we've both come to this realization of what really matters in this world. And that's what's just so beautiful. And I'm so excited to continue celebrating Topsy. And I'm so thankful and have so much gratitude to Topsy because she's opened this door for me to release some of those resistance that I had before. And it's all because of that one swipe that I decided not to actually swipe.
I really hope that you enjoy this episode, and I just have one favor to ask you. If you could just make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a rating and review, it's going to help us tremendously to make sure that we reach as many people as possible that you think should be listening to our episodes. I'll see you next week for another episode, and thank you so much for leaving that one review, that one subscription, and sharing this with your friends.